Okay, people, anyway, I'm happy to be here. And I'm sorry about last week. It was terrible. So here we are, thinking we're here for this little hour to think about, analyze, contemplate the meaning of life, really, and how to apply it in our daily lives so we can be a little bit more stable, a little bit less neurotic, a little bit less depressed, a little bit less angry, a bit more content and fulfilled, and therefore more empathetic and useful. That's the bottom line, really. That's the bottom line. Bottom line. So that's our motivation. That's why we're here together, thinking this way. So I'm wondering, who's that with John? You got a new girlfriend, John?
No, CJ with a different hairstyle.
Oh.
It's coming back, Curly.
Same person with a different hairstyle. Very good. I didn't recognize you, darling. I thought he got chuck you out and got a new one. I'm very glad he didn't do that. Okay, good, darling. Okay, so what to talk about? I'll tell you what we'll talk about. Just somehow an email recently from someone. I mean, she's been practicing for years, like some of us, and she, and she said, I get upset when people take me for granted, when I don't get acknowledged. I think this is something everybody feels. We are so kind of fragile. And she said, well, I try to be patient and I try to see things as impermanent. And I said, well, that's good, but you've got to apply the direct antidote. And in order to apply the direct antidote, you have to identify the exact problem. I mean, we can say in general our delusions. Buddha would say our delusions, our ignorance, our blah, blah, blah. But you've got to be precise, And this is the key point, the really key point about the Buddhist approach to the mind. And it's initially surprising because when we talk about psychology, we generalize things, Oh, wait a minute. I've got this wretched thing interfering with my life here. What is it? Come on, go away. We sort of like we talk about very general things, but the Buddhist approach, the Buddhist approach is so precise. Why? Is because you're not discussing the thing the person did. You're not discussing the environment. You're not discussing the weather. In other words, you're not discussing the thing out there that triggered the thing in here, which is our usual approach. When we talk about our problem, what's wrong, John? And he'll say, well, CJ said this and she didn't do that and she said this and only this. And I said, no, that might be CJ's problem. What's your problem? But we're not used to such precision because we don't have that type of analysis with respect to us. Well, we do, but this is the key Buddhist approach. In our mind, we either have deluded, neurotic, disturbed, afflicted, misconceiving emotions, things that are not valid because they cause us to live in la-la land, and they are the source of our suffering. And then we have virtuous states of mind. So you can't suffer because of virtuous states of mind. If you are patient and kind and loving and compassionate, and that predominates, you won't suffer much. It's very simple, even if someone's mean to you. But so what causes us to suffer is the delusions in the mind. But we hear that, but even if we're good little Buddhists, we really can't hear it. Because why? Because we are addicted, and the Buddha would say from countless lifetimes of practicing it, to pointing to the finger to the outside. So don't feel guilty, don't feel neurotic, don't feel, oh, I'm a bad person. The habit is primordially deep. So whether it's happy feelings or whether it's unhappy feelings, it's the same problem. Why are you happy, Robina? And I will describe every lovely thing my boyfriend does. Why are you unhappy, Robina? I will describe all the ugly thing he does. Because we assume we're kind of this innocent victim that's pulled from pillar to post by these external conditions, and that we really don't play much role at all. I mean, I say this, and it's very shocking. I quote this, but it's hard to hear it. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, the vast majority of people on the planet, it's not being patronizing, it's just using the Buddha's analysis and pointing out the problem. The vast majority of people on the planet, hear the words, please, I've got to repeat them twice, so hard to hear it, have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind, that what goes on in the mind plays any role at all in their lives. That's very shocking. We think that doesn't seem possible, but analyze what it means. It means the outside world, which looms so large for us. Because why? It's obvious. Because the second we wake up in the morning until we go to sleep at night, what part of our mind is predominating? It's the sensory consciousnesses, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our taste, and our touch. And what are the objects of those 5 sense consciousnesses? By definition, the external world, the external world, the things out there. So of course, because we make the body the boss, as Lama Yeshe says, and our sensory experiences are powerful, we see the outside world, we hear the outside world. So as far as we are concerned, they are the main cause of the feelings and thoughts and emotions that arise in my mind. So we think what arises in our mind is like the sort of passive recipient of things out there. We don't realize that what goes on in our mind determines whether we're suffering or happiness, whether we suffer or happy. That's the shocking part that Buddha's saying. We can prove it every day, but we don't join the dots when we hear it, you know. And so then we need, if we're trying to apply Buddha's teachings, we need to know the names of the parts of our mind. I mean, this kind of precision and clarity is what we know you need to be a good gardener, to be a good cook, you know, to be a good scientist. We know that, but not when it comes to knowing the mind. We don't think it's like that at all. But this is the Buddha's approach. So we all know the problem and not being acknowledged, not, you know, being taken for granted. We have to identify the specific delusion in the mind that is the source of that suffering. Well, there's 2 actually, and they're like cousins. They're probably like, they're cousins. And it's very hard to identify, brother and sister, it's very hard to identify the difference between them. So one of them is called attachment to being approved of, being seen, being acknowledged. And the other one's called pride. Now, nobody likes to admit to having pride. You flip it over and it's called low self-esteem. And we don't mind admitting to that. But it's the flip side of pride. So all the delusions, this is the Buddha's analysis, all these unhappy states of mind have the very specific function of, first of all, being painful. In their nature, they're painful. But also they have the function of exaggerating something. So we know if attachment is in the mind, and it's multifaceted, let's say simple attachment to an object of the senses, the cake, let's say, that's an easy attachment to identify. If attachment to cake is in the mind, we know that the attachment in the mind, if we're trying to be Buddhist, causes the cake to look extremely more delicious than it really is. So if aversion is in the mind, if you hate chocolate cake, then the aversion in the mind will cause the cake to look ugly to you. So we can really see this. We can see this. So that gets more subtle here when we talk about attachment to reputation. So in this case, what is attachment exaggerating? It seems quite difficult. It seems quite hard to hear it like that. Well, attachment is multifaceted. I mean, Lama, she says, I could tell you about it for a whole year. We won't begin to understand it. And the Buddha's telling us, actually, that according to his 4 Noble Truths, which is basic presentation of why there is suffering and what it is, and as far as he's called what are the causes, the main cause of ordinary suffering of ordinary people in day-to-day life is called attachment. So it's quite shocking to hear that, because it's not how we think about attachment. So it's multifaceted, you know. One of the main, and this is very much related to attachment to reputation. One of the main energies of attachment is the feeling of not being enough. Well, the one about cake too is the feeling of not having enough, something missing. So Lou, what did Dundrup say?
I was unable to get in touch with him.
Okay.
I called him and he didn't answer the phone. I left a message.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so attachment the feeling of attachment is I don't have enough. That's the grossest level. That's why we go searching for the cake or another boyfriend or a new thing or money or all the external objects. That's a fairly evident one. You don't feel satisfied. You don't feel fulfilled. I don't have enough. So then we think when I get the cake, it'll fill up the gaping hole. So the one with reputation, it's a funny word to say, attachment to reputation. It's more fundamental. It's attachment to being, it's attachment to being liked. Put it that way, it's quite shocking. We'll say, but it's normal. Everybody wants to be liked. Yeah, but that's what we're talking about here. The neediness, the emotional neurotic neediness to be liked. Having a nice relationship with a human being and having love and compassion, this is wonderful. They're not a problem. So the problem is when it's attachment. And of course, that's something that pervades all of our relationships, but we just take it for granted. So because we have this attachment, so what's feeling of lacking there is that I am lacking. I am not enough. Not just I don't have enough, but my very feeling of my own self is that I'm not enough. We feel that, and it's this aching sense of just not having enough, not being enough. And so the way we try to fill it, and it's such a deep assumption in everybody on this planet, is we crave relationships. So I mean, look how totally our whole culture is built around this relationship. We saw, where you have a partner, and then you might have babies and dogs and cats and a house and you live together. This is the classic way that attachment to reputation really plays out. This is not saying love and compassion is not there as well. We're not discussing the virtues. So the feeling we have very strongly that we don't have, that's the obvious one, that we don't have a partner. These days it's more acceptable to not have a partner. I mean, lots of people live on their own now and you're not seen like some weird person, whereas once upon a time you would have been like a pariah not to have a partner. You didn't even exist, So this is how this attachment to this idea of being approved of and seen plays out in that sense, that, if you go and so you go searching for a partner. I'm not being sarcastic, and I'm not putting partners down. It's looking at the attachment aspect of it. So this is why if you don't find a partner, then what's the assumption? I must not be a valid person, isn't it? Think this way. So so the idea of a moment of a person not listening to you when you're talking to them is like the big picture is when you don't have a partner. That's an entire life, that you're worthless. So in that moment you're talking to somebody and you're leaning in and you're telling them something and they're not paying attention to you. That's the hurt we feel, is because we don't feel we've been approved of. So we've got to analyze this. We've got to really analyze it. Forget about the society level of you're just not a valid person if you don't have a partner. But the very fact that we assume that because you don't listen to me, I must be not valid. That's what we're feeling. That's what it means. Why would we hunger so much after someone's approval? You have to ask yourself that question. Why? What is this emotional hunger about? Why is it, do I assume, which is the point, that I am not valid unless someone says I am? That's how deep it is. And it runs the universe. It's what underpins our relationships. It's the source of the pain we experience in day-to-day life. Even if it's a person who's a stranger, doesn't look at you nicely, you're upset and offended, I mean, this is not criticizing us. This is pointing out how we suffer. It should break our hearts for ourselves. But it's so pervasive, isn't it? It's so pervasive. So this is where it's really linked, and they're really confusing because they seem such similar voices in the head. This one of low self-esteem, but that's another one, and that's the flip side of what's called pride. So if all the delusions have the function of exaggerating something, pride exaggerates your importance. So you flip it over, and that deflates and becomes low self-esteem, and that everybody recognizes, and that over exaggerates your lack of worth, doesn't it? So there's the emotional hunger to be seen as a nice girl, and then you add to that this cousin, if it's pride, hungers, assumes I'm important, and then gets offended if people don't praise me. So there's two different things there. And that's why we have to be paying attention to our mind. And that's why if we want to understand these different delusions, we have to know what they are. How do you know it? By studying Buddhist psychology. You can't distinguish between a herb and a flower if you don't know botany. You can't just guess, you know. Same here. The precision we need is quite clear. And these are why we suffer so terribly. So in other words, it's quite shocking, really, the assumption behind this attachment to being seen as a good girl, this attachment to being approved of. It has to be that I am not worthwhile as I am. In myself, as I am, sitting here now, I am not worthwhile. And I'm only worthwhile when someone smiles at me and says, Robina, you're worthwhile. I mean, it's quite schizophrenic if you think about it. You've got to ask the question, what is it in us that makes us feel that I'm not worthy until someone says I'm worthy? Because that's what basically we're craving for. So that's why, and what's so interesting, when we're really having this suffering of thinking I'm nobody, and then one person shows they like you, I mean, like you just become like this lemming. You don't care if they're a vampire. Oh, wow, someone loves me. No wonder we get into serious trouble in our relationships. We attract garbage, you know, and because some garbage dump person who's rude and arrogant and beats me up, they approve of me, we still think I must be worthwhile if somebody approves of me, even though they're murdering me. I mean, we are so ridiculous, you know, because this attachment to being seen, it almost, you could say, it's the closest delusion to the root delusion, the very assumption of a separate me in the first place, which sounds so abstract in our modern psychology. It sounds ridiculous, you know, because when you've cut all these delusions and you've realized emptiness and you've perfected it, and then not to mention having bodhicitta, it's like there's no sense of a separate self. It's like that. Your sense of a self is so hugely connected to others. You know, there's none of this misery any longer of being separate me with all the neurotic voices, because all those delusions are just the voices of this unhappy separate me. It almost seems too weird for us in modern psychology, because the assumption of a self is implicit in all of our views, you know? So it's quite subtle. But we can see, we're so fragile. The smallest thing that someone does so offends us, you know, so hurts us. So we've got to see the difference between attachment to reputation and pride, because they're different. They're different, you know. Attachment to reputation, I mean, pride, and this is where this is a very difficult conversation. None of us would think that we're proud, arrogant. We do not think we're arrogant, but we all definitely confess to having low self-esteem. Well, let me tell you that you wouldn't have low self-esteem. In other words, you wouldn't exaggerate your bad qualities if you didn't exaggerate your good ones. If you had humility, which in a sense, apart from attachment to reputation, a humility is like a quality that kind of accepts yourself in a way, to some degree, you know? You're kind of fairly easygoing. You're not all puffed up and you're not all low self-esteem. We run between those two extremes. You're fairly kind of content. Then you wouldn't be offended if people didn't like you much, or if people have insulted you. You wouldn't mind so much. But we mind terribly because we're yearning for their approval, and we're upset and angry. How dare that person look at me like that, you know? So also pride is very linked to anger. Like if you're arrogant, I mean, I remember Atisha says, and I can't think which one he said, but both work. He said, the best patience is humility. But he might have said the best humility is the best patience, which really shows the intimate relationship between these two. And these kind of words in our culture, in our psychological models, are kind of like corny in a way. We don't talk like this, but this is the substance of the Buddhist view of the mind. And these states of mind go really quite deep, you know. And these, of course, are the delusions. We're not discussing the love, compassion, the kindness. So what's the antidote to when you feel you're not being approved of? Basically, when someone doesn't like you. I mean, put it simply, you know. Well, I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. We've got to look at, we've got to analyze what you've got to ask yourself. You've got to ask yourself the question, why do I assume that as I am, who I am as I am, somehow isn't enough? Isn't enough. I need someone to say I'm lovely. This is we can really see this when we're very suffering, and we're all coming from a suffering place. And as we grow and heal our minds by becoming our own therapists and working on ourselves, this lessens this suffering. But we like we feel, and this is a very real suffering we have. We don't feel we're being heard or seen. So I'm sure since we're little girls, if our mummy never acknowledged us and never, we'd feel like we really would. But the source of it, it's not your mother's lacking of approval of you. The source of it is this yearning, this neediness, this hunger that's so subtle. It's not articulate. We don't say the words, It's just this deep feeling of not being worthy until someone appraises us. And even then, because we're so much full of low self-esteem, the flip side of pride, even when someone does praise us and does like us, it doesn't help us. No, I'm a creep, really, So it's like so painful. We can see this. I love this saying in English. We say it. I mean, we've got to learn to become our own person. This is a really profound concept, actually. It's very much what Buddha's talking about. As you heal your mind, as you lessen attachment, which means become more fulfilled, as we think when lessening attachment sounds like you're suffering, but no, you become more fulfilled. The result of attachment is you're not fulfilled. But giving up attachment, you become more content, more fulfilled, more whole. And if you learn to be content with yourself and your own choices and your own decisions and what you do and where you go and how you think, that's giving up attachment to reputation. When we've got strong attachment to reputation, we don't even know what we think. We don't even know what we think. We're too scared to make any decisions because we always want someone else to approve of us first. We can see this. So we start to become our own person and not mind so much what other people think. This is really a profound step in our own progress, But it's very subtle. And it's much harder to see. I always sort of speak of it like this. You've got kind of the nice people, you've got the good girls and the bad girls. And the bad girls make trouble and shout and yell. And they look like they don't care what other people think. I looked like I was independent and I could do what I wanted and shout and yell. But I yearned for people to love me as well. We all do, But when you're a good person, when you're a nice person, and I don't mean this sarcastically, when you are genuinely kind and you're patient and you don't get angry easily, it's very hard to see this attachment, because a person who's very patient and kind also doesn't like to upset the apple cart. So they will be overly compensating, overly nice, overly doing what other people want to try and keep the peace, That means you can't see in your own mind this. You think you're being a nice, kind person, but it's not. It's actually attachment to reputation, attachment to being seen as a good boy, seen as a good girl. It's quite subtle. We have to really look at it carefully, So when you've got this less attachment to reputation, you have more courage, you have more conviction in what you think. You learn from your mistakes, you become more humble, but you become your own person. You make your own choices and you don't mind if people don't like it. Then you really can move forward in life. If we're living in paranoia every minute about upsetting people, thinking, I can't do that, he might get upset. No, we're not worried about upsetting somebody. We're worried about them not liking us, not approving of us. We call it, people who are quite patient and quiet. Oh, no, I wouldn't say that. I didn't want to upset them. No, you don't want them to dislike you is the real reason. You might have some kindness there that doesn't want to upset the other person, but you're not being honest and authentic because you're afraid they'll dislike you. It's quite subtle. It's quite subtle inside us. It's the last attachment to go, actually. They say this, because it's the closest to ego grasping. Like I always give that example. They say that the yogis in the mountains who really worked on their minds, have given up attachment to so many things, so courageous, going to the mountains and giving up sex, drugs, and rock and roll. They're still thinking about what the people down in the village are thinking about them. That's attachment to reputation, because this is a voice in our head all the time. When we're doing things on our own, it's like we're telling somebody, we're talking to somebody, we're imagining having a conversation with somebody, we're getting a person to hear what we think. We're all the time talking to somebody, and that's why we get lonely. We have no one to share our thoughts with. Again, being brutal, ask the question, what is it about my thoughts and my experiences that somehow are not valid until someone else hears them? There's no logical reason at all. There's none at all. But we have this yearning and it's just this painful attachment. And we're all like this. Don't criticize yourself. This is why we suffer. And this is a tragic suffering in our culture when there's all this loneliness, because people, you've lived your life being like you've lived your life, not paying much attention to your mind, no self-awareness, and you're just a nice person and you do the job and you get married, you take care of the kids and you cook the dinner and hubby comes home and no one listens to you. That's very typical of many people on this planet. They're like invisible people. They just float along. There's no awareness of their own mind. There's no sense of fulfillment. They only want other people's approval, but they're not angry and shouting and yelling. They're just passive. They become these lonely, isolated people who don't know their own mind, don't know how to reach out to other people. No one sees them. No one appreciates them. This is really common, It's tragic, completely tragic. That's why if you hear about a person going off to do a couple of months retreat on their own, in our culture, that's like mental illness. We can't even imagine what the person's doing, because we define ourselves in our culture in terms of being social beings. That's how we define ourselves. We define children as becoming socialized by mixing with other people. Our view of a person growing up is a person who is socialized with other people. The Buddhist view of a person growing up is a person who can sort themselves out and become their own person. And then they can really have nice relationships. So it's very fascinating, this approach, Are we communicating, people? Are there any questions? You see, this stuff all sounds so simple, but this is the stuff of Buddhist psychology, which is what we need to do years and years in retreat on. So going into retreat is like doing intense therapy, basically. Do you understand? So are there any questions? Looks like Kath's about to try and unmute. You can unmute, Kath? Go, honey, talk to me.
Good morning from Bali.
Good morning from Bali. What's the weather like there?
Oh, it's good today.
Good.
There's a bit of blue sky. It's been quite
Australia. Catherine, an Australian girl, lives in Bali, this lovely island north of Australia that Australians adore.
Yes, Robina and I went to sort of sister schools.
Yeah, we did. That's right. We were both
nearby.
taught by the Catholic nuns. That's right. Good Catholic girls.
How we got here.
Go, Kath. What's your story? What's the story?
Oh, well, it's just so pertinent, everything that you're teaching this morning. Thank you. I had this experience yesterday. I've just broken up with my partner of 4 or 5 years, and it's been a fraught relationship.
I can imagine.
Yes. Everything that you always
the breaking up part or the 4 to 5 year relationship, which one was more fraught? The relationship or the whole deal, isn't it?
The whole deal. Well, I've got to put my hand up, responsible. It's not all him or them. But I had this moment yesterday. Like I'm the one that's broken it up.
Okay.
And it's a really good thing. It was very toxic. And I had this moment yesterday. I was walking the dog, and I suddenly had this thought about something that had happened about 2 or 3 months ago, which I'd sort of let slide and sort of come to terms with and thought, you know, well, if he's messing with his ex-wife, then, because that's the whole reason it's all gone sideways. But I had this thought and it nearly knocked me off my feet. And I, even at the time, like it was like I'd been shot in the heart, and just this adrenaline and this this negativity and fear and horror of what if that had happened like 2 or 3 months ago. But I'd already digested that and kind of cruised on through it. But it was that the impact of this thought was so powerful that it filled me with toxicity, basically. I could feel it. And I just thought, I'm so thankful for that I've taken refuge, because I was able to just sort of watch myself like I was in the cinema rather than dive. Because if I dived into it, I would have been in fetal position. It was that kind of level of pain that took over my body physically. And I just thought I'd love to ask you this question, that when is a thought, like, so what I thought to myself, like years ago, I would have thought, oh, that is just so powerful. That thought has had such a strong impact on me. I must be right.
I understand.
I must be right. I'm having clairvoyance. I'm having insight. Otherwise, why would this just come out of the blue and shoot me in the heart and in the solar plexus?
So
like
the thoughts you're talking about was some kind of recognition of something that did happen, was it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that I don't have a clear answer on. It's like a bit of a what if, which I kind of let go and thought, well, I won't get the answer, so it doesn't matter. But when the thought hit me,
you mean, so why, I really want to understand you. You said, and I know the feeling of the adrenaline coming and the shock and the horror. So you mean it was the thought that arose about something that he would have or could have done? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And it's about like cheating on you or something?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So then I'd say that shock and horror and the adrenaline, that's the arising of this very powerful feeling of ego grasping, which is the primordial sense of self, which is the one that literally, when fear is triggered, it's like you've just been shot, or you've just been nearly run over by a car, or you're nearly drowning. That's when the I arises really powerfully. And that's a good sign if you're trying to practice, Kath, because you're purifying it. And if you dealt with it and moved on, then that's excellent, because every time you feel attacked or insulted or hurt or offended and you can work with it, you've just purified a whole bunch of garbage. That's a really positive way to see it, because instead of launching into the story and reinforcing it and getting more angry and more resentful, like what normally would happen. But it's a very powerful sign of the ego rising and you fixing it and purifying it. So well done is what I would suggest. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. And it was sort of it's the other part of the situation is this relationship has been, I think a really big sort of karmic clash between he and I, and the ex-wife, who I can't get rid of her. He's dragging her along like a dead carcass.
I understand, darling. So it seems a really intelligent thing to do to separate yourself from it. You can't live like that. It's like a nightmare.
It has been a nightmare in many ways. And
very wise decision.
I don't know whether it's wise for me to seek insight, because of course I have more questions, but my burning question is, have I dealt with this karmic event in my life, his life, her life, so that, because I have the freedom to walk away.
Well, you've done the best, most intelligent thing. There's some garbage there between you, and you could live in that for years and go tormented, but you've cut free and you can move forward. This is just fantastic. It's intelligent. It's the best thing to do, very best. And you're open,
Yeah.
so by giving up that attachment, you're opening new doors and you're allowing new things to come. It's very courageous and very intelligent. It's plain intelligence, Kath. The nightmare in so many relationships is because we can't let go, and then it just becomes like torment, and you kill it. It's not surprising we kill each other, you know. So it's intelligent and practical, and you've cleaned it up. It's like a big atomic bomb moving you forward, darling. So just go forward, and you keep seeing your own mind more and more clearly. Keep practicing, keep seeing your mind, and keep moving, baby. It's perfect.
Yeah. Thank you, Venerable.
Well done. Well done. Thank you, Kath. What else, people? Anything else? We have 20 minutes to go. Anything there, Mary? Any questions in the none? Any questions, dearest people? Nothing. Okay. I mean, if you think about it, this is, I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm going to get exposed one day for talking about the same thing all the time, but this is all it is. And all we can, I mean, and it's, you can know, it's like the theory, like you listen to musical theory and you say, oh, I've heard that once before, but you know, you can play it for 20 years, 30 years. And every time you play it, you get a bit more depth. Everything is like that. And so this is where it's such a rich experience, not just intellectual. If it's merely intellectual, you get bored after the first time. But if you're really applying this stuff and really practicing, every time we hear it more deeply. So each of you in the room right now, including me, we hear it according to our own level. The same words. And that really struck me one time. If you go to the teachings, like say the Dalai Lama, the typical teachings of the Tibetans there, in the front row were the 80-year-old abbots who've been hearing this stuff for 75 years. And in the back row are the 5-year-olds who've been hearing it for the first time. They're both hearing the same words, but you bring what you've got in here to the words, and you give it meaning according to your own capacity. That's what's so rich about this kind of teachings, especially when you can describe it, when we can talk about it experientially, you know, not just theoretically. Experientially, it's super rich, super delicious. So we keep, and that's why we have some humility to listen freshly every time. Then we'll get some more tools from it and bring those to bear every time. And that's how I find myself, you know. So from that perspective, I never get bored talking about it, because this is the substance of what I'm trying to do in my mind as well. It's my job every day. So this is my practice. And I fortunately have to speak it out loud. So thank you for listening, you know. But it's me talking to myself in a sense. It's my own internal practice, you know. It's very delicious, very rich, not boring. If it's just intellectual, it's boring. Oh, I've heard that before. Give me something new, you know. Because the path is so integrated, the Buddhist psychology is so integrated. It's so integrated. Especially when you start to hear about the deepest delusion, ego grasping, this colloquial term for this belief in the intrinsic self, which is hard initially intellectually to even intellectually to understand. But when we realize attachment's the main voice of this ego grasping, every time we understand attachment, it's chipping away at the ego grasping, you know. Every time we understand anger, that chips away at attachment, because they're so intimately related. They're not just sort of different intellectual kind of things. They're very integrated experientially. It's very fascinating. And then, of course, because here we're emphasizing the problems. We're looking at the problems. And this is the key point in Buddhism, that Buddha's, his analysis of these delusions, these afflictions, these unhappy states of mind, is that they, in their nature, are the source of our pain. And the love and compassion and kindness and wisdom and clarity, they are in their nature the cause of our happiness. So when the virtues can prevail, that's when we're really moving forward, you know. But this is also an interesting topic. I mean, like Kath's particular example of leaving a relationship, you know, is such a mixture of so many things. Because for sure, if you have a relationship, a romantic relationship with somebody, there has been, or there was at some point, or there might even still be, what's called love. And love is a virtuous state of mind. It's under the positive heading. It's an altruistic state of mind. It's valid. It's the source of my happiness. And what it is basically the delight when someone else is happy. So when you say you love somebody, you mean you want them to be happy. That's love. But half the time, of course, for us, it's completely polluted by attachment, and we cannot tell one from another. So this is one of the major jobs we have to learn to do, to distinguish between the positive states of mind and the delusions that come along practically at the same time and pollute the virtues, pollute the love and compassion, you know.
Hi, Venerable.
Who's that?
It's Juhi.
Hello, Juhi, talk to me.
Hi.
Yes,
It's been a little while. So I was just thinking through this
Yes.
present situation. I literally just got out of an argument with my husband like 10 minutes ago
Oh my
about.
God.
No, it was okay. It was okay. So we've got 3 kids. It gets overwhelming just with just the pace of life and whatnot, just regular stuff. And this morning I shared with him that, you know, it's I'm feeling isolated and I'm feeling a little bit rushed and hurried and it's creating some anxiety. So he listened to me. Yeah, okay, yeah, understand. Okay. So I said, and I attribute all of that to just with keeping this household and the operations running, especially with the children, etc. And then this evening, he tells me that I'm inviting one of our daughter's friends who doesn't have a mom, who's you know, she's a sweet girl. She's our daughter's age, 10 and a half, 11. She lives close to us. So he said, I'm calling her tomorrow over so she can spend the whole day with us and with Sachi, our daughter. And don't say no.
Okay, so you go.
So my question to him was, did you not hear what I said this morning, that I'm at a point of just going low and easy and slow. I just want to deal with 3 kids right now and not a 4th one.
I see.
We got
Okay.
into an argument just right now because he's forcing me to accept the fact that this house is open for everyone. Everyone should come and go, especially the children's friends. And it made me feel really like crappy when he said that, because I felt really shallow.
So then what is that about then? Why would you feel? Why do you feel? So why do you feel? I mean, so you feel overwhelmed because you're the one who has to run the show and take care of the kids. He takes care of the kids, or he goes to work, or he works at home.
No, he does. He's a 50% partner in everything. He is. So
then why do you feel burdened by it if that's the case? If he really is 50%, so you've got to look at something that's. I mean, I think you don't have to talk about it in public. It's like it's important. You've got to be seeing what it is that's causing you. What is it that's triggering your stress? Because stress is just attachment, you know, anger, attachment, worried about what will happen, worried about not being able to cope with what's happening. Or indeed, it could very well be you feeling you're not being acknowledged and not being supported and not being helped. Do you think that's part of it? I mean, if your husband can make you this.
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's about, his perception of me in ways where I can't keep up to just this ideal he has in his mind that my wife is like a superwoman. She can do everything. She really can take care of everything. So what is the small thing that she's saying no to? And that judgment really like bothers me when he tries to make me feel like
he's praising. That sounds like he's praising you. Aren't you nourished by that view he has of you? You're not nourished by that. You feel like offended.
Yeah.
Well,
I do feel like
sometimes, I mean, we're all human beings. We're human beings, Juhi. So you've got to find a way that if your husband says he's going to invite this girl to be there all day, that's fine. But that doesn't mean you have to be there. It does. Maybe you can take.
I did say that.
No, I think if it is a 50-50 and you can, each of you make unilateral decisions about who comes for the day, then, you know, you can't expect him to accept your decision of inviting somebody who's going to be there if you're able to make individual decisions. So you have to also make individual decisions as to whether you'll be there. So I feel that's important for you, and not to feel guilty about that, and don't do it out of resentment. But if it's too much, you just say, oh, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for her and I hope it goes well, but I've got to take some time off. And you've got to be able to have that between you. You've got to be able to have that. And if you've got to have that, otherwise it's too much stress with each other. Is it not?
It is. It can be. Yeah.
Well, anyway, in general, I admire you for having a husband and 3 children. I think you're pretty incredible. You know, I always joke and say my husband and there'd be dead children and dead husbands if I had them. So honey, chop it, but listen to what you're feeling. You're a human being, and take some time if you need to. Have the courage to be able to know you can make that decision.
Yeah. And is it this I that rises up like so nastily that says, how come he doesn't understand me? So I'm
course, well,
literally in my head competing with this 10-year-old girl, which is what made me made me cringe. It made me cringe.
And well, that's just neediness we have to be seen and approved of.
Yeah.
And that's the very deep source of a lot of our pain. It might be true that he's not hearing you and not seeing you. That could be valid, but you've got to look more deeply at your yearning to have it. Because when that yearning is very strong, no matter how much he does approve of you and does see you, it will never be enough. So we've got to look at that hunger and know that you are okay as you are. And you can give yourself approval. This is a really powerful point that we have to work with every day, darling.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. Thank you, Madam.
All right, sweetheart. Slowly, Juhi. What else? What else? Anything else, darlings? Any other points to discuss? Fernando, what is there? Something there? Nothing, okay. What else, dearest people? I know when I very first, when I studied the mind, when I studied Lorig, the text, this is like many years ago. And I mean, initially you just study it in a very technical way, just like you would botany. You get your books out, you learn all the Latin words, you learn all the theories, and it just sounds so boring. And when you compare it 20 years later with the actual experience of growing a garden, you really can see the difference between the theories and the practice. But you couldn't be able to grow that garden now if you didn't have the theories. And that's why it's so important in the Buddhist perspective to study these texts, to study the analysis of the mind. What are the different parts of the mind? How do they function? And it's then when you start to put meat on the bones yourself from your own experience, that's when it really becomes worthwhile. Because I can say with certainty, I could not be saying these words that I'm saying to you right now unless I'd studied that text and the other texts, like 40 years ago. It's absolute certainty. So it's worth the effort, Otherwise, it's like, yeah, is this worth it? Because then you're able to really go deeper into the mind. This is the key point. And this is the hard job of being a Buddhist, What else, darlings? 10 minutes to go. Nothing there, Mary. So in other words, we have to keep studying the words, learn the words, and some very good books around. Like I always, would recommend you study Geshe Tashi. There's this book that Wisdom Publications published as one of the as the text for Geshe Tashi's program that he taught in England 30 years ago. And it's just simply called Buddhist Psychology, but it's his commentary to English-speaking people in English of Lorig, and it's very down to earth, and I really recommend it. I mean, if you're already receiving teachings from your teachers now on Lorig, that's brilliant, but you need to read other texts, and this one's really excellent, literally called Buddhist Psychology by Geshe Tashi, and it's published by Wisdom. And it's still, even though it's down to earth, it's still some of it's quite intellectual, quite hard to grasp it initially, but it's so worthwhile. This is the very basis of knowing how to know your own mind really precisely, so you can unpack and unravel and go ever more deeply, identifying the thoughts in your mind, because all the emotions we have are rooted in being thoughts. This is the point. And they're all kind of mixed together like a big soup, because they're also spontaneous and they all kind of rush in together. It's like it's like when you're someone playing music and they're playing Bach on the piano, 1,000 notes a second. Nobody who doesn't know musical theory could possibly identify one of those notes. Not possible. And that's the way we've practiced to perfection our delusions, if you like. We're going playing this chaotic music. It's not possible to identify all the different thoughts because they're so automatic. So we've got to go back and reverse the process and unpack and unravel all these emotions and go beyond the emotions and get down deeper and deeper into the conceptual stories that inform the emotions. Yes, Mary.
Okay,
Someone's there?
Venerable, I have a question, or maybe it's a request. If you could retell the story about the BMW and it getting scratched and the neighbor buying a fancy gift. I need to
Okay.
hear that again.
Well, that's a really powerful example of another teaching altogether, which is the teaching of taking the blame when you've been offended by somebody. That's a more advanced teaching in the Lojong teachings, where you're trying to really take the experiences of having harm from others and using it to develop your own compassion. It's a more advanced teaching. So just giving it its context, Mary. So I will tell that story. Yes. So there's this, this is coming from the 8 verses of mind training. One of the verses in there, which is a shocking kind of piece of advice, it's in the more advanced teachings of how to cultivate bodhicitta, where when someone has blamed you for something you didn't do, what do? You accept the blame and you give the victory to them. Now, our trouble is even when we do something wrong and we've been accused, it's still painful because automatically the I wants to defend itself, So this is a massive practice, but not to confuse it with being a martyr. This is the big problem. This is an advanced practice, but we misunderstand it for thinking, oh, all right, I'm the bad person. Please hit me again. That's being a martyr, and that is absolutely not what's being said. So there's this wonderful story about this guy in Australia, John. There was some party. He had his Buddhist friends over, and he was telling everybody about how his brand new BMW had been scratched right along the doors. And he didn't know who did it, so he got new doors, and then suddenly he finds them scratched again, and he discovered it's the wacky guy next door, this old guy, and he has no idea why, because as far as he's concerned, he's done nothing wrong to this old guy. But this old guy obviously is convinced John has done something wrong. So he scratches his car, So John kind of jokingly said to his friends, well, what you do? Well, one said, well, I'd scratch his car, I'd call the police. And then George, my friend George, who was at the party, he said, I'll tell you what Lama Zopa would do. He would discover what this old guy liked and then buy him a very beautiful gift and apologize to this old guy. Now, that initially is demented, isn't it? Like, what are you talking about? I didn't do anything wrong. But when this is my own commentary now, when we understand karma, the kind of karma that's called experiences similar to the cause, which is the way that people see us and treat us. So if a person thinks you're doing wrong and you didn't do wrong, this is due to past life karma. If a person dislikes you now, it's because of past life karma, not necessarily anything you've done wrong now. This is why we're so struggling with this. So clearly this old bloke, there's some karma between them, and he perceives John as doing something wrong. But John had done nothing wrong in this life anyway. So John accepted this. So he found out this old guy liked golf. And he bought him these really fancy, expensive golf balls, wrapped them beautifully, went and knocked on his door, offered him the gift, and he apologized for anything he'd done wrong. I mean, that's a pretty incredible thing, right? To do that happily. So anyway, he felt glad about the whole thing. He felt it was all over. And he's in the kitchen having a cup of tea. And this old bloke knocks on the door with his gift unwrapped, beaming from ear to ear. And he said, this is the kindest thing anyone has done. And he said, everything is forgiven. I mean, it's like that was the bonus on top. Even if the guy didn't forgive him, somehow you'd feel very powerful because you cleaned up the karma, So, but I mean, so you got the story clear, Mary, right? So in general, when a person like, you're talking to yourself, you told us the last time Mary happened to mention about her sister. I'm not trying to give private things away, or a friend of hers who's giving her a really hard time. They've had a hard time for years. So this is where somehow that's due to past karma. So often, Mary, it's just because a person comes with a certain mind, they're a bit paranoid, they feel a bit jealous, so they see you in a really certain way and project onto you all their feelings. They blame you for things that you didn't do. We all live like this. And that's why we all go crazy, So when we know the person's suffering and we know it must be some past karma, and you can really take responsibility, not as a victim, but strongly and truly apologize for anything you've done wrong, it can be very, very cathartic for a person. It could be enough to fix it. Depends on the person. But you really got to get yourself out of yourself to do that, because the pain of it's so huge, especially when it's families. And other times it's not appropriate to do that. You've got to know what the time and the space and the time when to do what. We've got to know. Some other time it might not be appropriate. You've got to have the wisdom to know what is best. It's really important. So we'll finish on that. All right. So keep moving, keep practicing, keep looking at your mind, never give up. You'll never get bored by it, and keep growing and growing, becoming your own person, which means when you get less attached, you don't get more miserable, you get more content. And when you're giving attachment to reputation up, becoming more whole, more fulfilled, more content with who you are. And therefore you become more authentic. You're able to make tough decisions. You're able to make amazing choices because nothing's holding you back. So have courage, people. All right. Dangchog, Semchog, Rinpoche, Makie, Panam, Kieguchi, Kepa Nyampa, Mepa Yang, Gongne, Gondru, Pavashog. May compassion grow and grow and grow in the hearts of all. That's it, darlings. All of you. Thank you, Kath. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you. Who else was there? There she was. I forget. She's gone. I forgot. All you people, all right? And never give up and keep studying and keep putting meat on the bones. And then it becomes rich, rich, rich. Okay?